So when we're seeing that grid and we're seeing cherries and bananas and all that stuff like that, really, it's a grid of numbers that have been randomized.
Right. In fact, why don't we go take a quick look and find the cherry. So the cherry is image 3 in the list. So this is 3. This card is our first card, but image 3. And somewhere on the board, I'm gonna reload this, and that's not gonna be the cherry anymore. Now it's the orange. So I reloaded it, and the orange is image 5. So somewhere on the board is another orange. I just gotta find it. Ooh, okay, there it is. So there's our orange. This is also, there's our orange, image 5. There's our orange, image 5. Those two matched. This bit of code right here executed. It said the number of card 1, 5. The number of card 2, 5. Those cards are the same. Do a little transition on each one to shrink them. When that transition is finished, call display remove as the on-complete action of the transition, and immediately remove those 2 cards from our list. So now, as I said previously, the cards table has 2 fewer entries. So what do we have left to do? We're trying to detect a win, and the win is no cards left in the table. So let's see, how do we detect that? We post a score. Basically, we send an event out that adds another point to our matches. Not part of the winning, just useful feedback for the user. And then we say, is the table empty? Now, what I'm doing here is calling table count. This is a non-standard function. It doesn't exist in the standard Lua library. This is something that is added by SSK. I didn't mention it, but this game uses SSK to build up the functionality of Lua and Corona to make things simpler. For example, the post function comes out of SSK. In addition, SSK extends the table library, the string library, the IO library. It adds a bunch of features basically for things that I do all the time, that game developers will do all the time.
Convenience methods.
Yeah, and among those is a count method. Now, if I had used an indexed table, a numerically indexed table, where it was 1, 2, 3, I could simply have said, if number of cards is equal to 0. In other words, it's index 1, 2, 3. When I remove 1, 2, 3, there's nothing left in the table. Lua is smart about this. It knows it's got a little piece of code to check that. So this is the simple thing. The problem is, whereas I wrote this in 2 lines of code, if I had wanted to use a numerically indexed table to do this bit, it would have been probably half a dozen to a dozen lines of code to get that right, to get it to be both safe and safe and to operate correctly. So I much prefer references to the objects as indices to the table. So doing that all the time in my own coding, I ran into this problem where I wanted to count how many entries were in a table. So not being able to do this, my only option was to do this.
So you kind of had to do the long form version, which can kind of clutter up the logic of the game.
I'm a lazy coder. I'm a lazy programmer in that once I've solved the problem, I don't like to solve it twice. So what I did here was I made this part nice and tight, but I needed a way to make the count part tight. So knowing that it's as simple as creating a local variable count, setting it to 0, using the pairs iterator, iterating over all entries in the table, and adding count for every one. At the end of this code, I would have the actual number of entries in the table. Why should I write that every time? So what I did was, in SSK, I simply created a new function called count that would do exactly what that bit of code did and return the count. So now, assuming that we don't switch to Lua 5.3 in the future, and Lua 5.3 already has a count function, then everything will be good. And in fact, SSK checks these kinds of things and will tell you if there was in fact a conflict with count, if it existed. So at least you would know that you're destroying existing functionality, because I considered that as a possibility. All right, so we've got the count. If the count is 0, boom, the game is over. And we have won. So I post an event because I'm fond of doing this. This is my favorite programming style. I don't like to have all my functions and modules have to sort of like know about each other if not necessary. I like to just simply have a module do the work locally and say, hey, if anybody cares, this just happened. Which 90% of the time, that works just fine. Very rarely do you need to actually hook the modules together and do things in a specific order. And in the cases where you do, then you do it. But otherwise, I simply create event listeners that sit out there waiting for events, and then I post events out into the ether. I like to say into the ether. And it gets picked up. You can consider it sort of magically by all the logic that's out there. So I post the on a game over, and then I do a little sound effect, the winning sound effect.
You know, I'm really trying to pay attention to these talks because I'm trying to train my brain to think in those terms of keeping things decoupled, you know, so that when I go to create something, I'm like, okay, well, I can create this. It's just like anything else, you know, I can create this, just like you said, I put it in line, so to speak, or I can create this in a way where it's reusable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, as you know, it takes a little bit to stop long enough to think about, you know, how exactly would you do that?
Yeah, it's a challenge. I'm going to say new programmers, but for all programmers who are not used to doing it, it's a challenge because it's a different programming methodology. And if you have not worked with an event-based system and sort of like just gotten used to it, that's not the way most people think.
Yeah. Well, even
Although it's not a great step beyond. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, even if you have worked with, you know, systems like object-oriented kind of systems or, you know, event-based systems, you kind of, you know, sometimes it still takes a little more effort to figure out the long-term solution than it does to just hammer out the code in line.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it can just be simpler. You're like, hey, I'll just, you know, I'll just. It's like when you know when you first start programming and you just copy paste, right? You just copy paste because that's, you know, I don't. It worked. I got it to work those 3 lines to work. I'll just copy paste them, you know, 30 times.
Yeah. Yeah, this is actually in the future. This would be an interesting mini topic where we could discuss event-based versus, and I can't think of the right word for it, but basically where modules know about other modules and there's cross dependencies, because cross dependencies themselves bring along a interesting challenge in Lua that StarCrunch, I can't remember his actual name. He gave me a very robust and elegant solution to, which is, it would be a wonderful show because it's something that people often find themselves needing to solve, where Module A uses something from Module B, but Module B wants to use something from Module A. Well, you can't straightforward require Module A into B and B into A because you create a loop that Lua doesn't know how to handle in the standard require. So there's a way to do it that he provided, which was quite elegant, that has solved many problems for me since then. So combined with using events, it opens up a large arena of solutions for you. So let me close out this discussion. So, okay, we've gotten as far as detecting the win. So let's go ahead and look for on game over. Interestingly enough, within game Lua, there is a function called on game over, which I've defined. So as soon as this file is loaded the first time, it defines the function and then immediately does a listen. So forever after that, it's simply waiting for the event to occur. And when it occurs, all it does is it destroys the HUDs, it creates a rectangle over the top of the screen, this little bit here, that prevents you from clicking on the screen anymore. It catches all touch inputs. Because you remember, this is the standalone version, so it doesn't have a nice framework over it. So what I wanted was you click, you win, no more clicking. You're done. You're done until the game lets you either you reload it or whatever the game does at that point.